Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for tuning in to this week's edition of Stop, Look, and Listen. I'm your host, LeTroy Gardner. This week, we have guitarist, songwriter, comic book artist.
Yeah.
Founding member of Nu Shooz. They brought us hits like I Can't Wait, Point of No Return, Should I Say Yes? We have John Smith. Welcome to the show, John.
Hey, thanks for having me on.
Oh, it's a pleasure to have you on. So how have you been? How's your summer going so far?
Well, we managed to escape the forest fire smoke, which is on both coasts, you know. Our son's out in New Hampshire, and he's getting smoke from Canada, and we're getting smoke from Eastern Washington. And we skated on it until, like, this week. And so now we're in for 4 days of forest fire smoke here in Bellingham. Mm-hmm. But other than that, it's been an okay summer. I've been having fun.
Okay, what are you working on?
I'm working on my 5th graphic novel, which I just do these things for fun, you know. I have this philosophy that I call art as surfing. And so, you know, surfers aren't doing it for awards or anything or make people love them more or anything. That just trying to get a good ride. And so that's all I'm trying to do with my graphic novels is trying to have fun. And so I'm finishing up my 5th one.
So when did you develop that mentality of surfing creatively? Because like we can start from the beginning. You started out as a Latin jazz band, and
you did your research, didn't you?
So take us back to your humble beginnings of the Latin jazz band and, you know, touring on a school bus.
Well, you know, I was thinking about this interview and I realized that Nu Shooz was the result of all these little pieces, puzzle pieces that fell into place. You know, when I was in high school, my mom bought a piano, and 4 years later I moved up to Portland, and I knew just enough piano and just enough Spanish that I picked up from my Spanish teacher to worm my way into this Latin band. And they said, "Can you play montunos?" which is the repeating figures in Latin music, you know, dun 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 dun. That thing. I knew just enough that and just enough Spanish to write songs for this band. And and it's funny because Spanish was first period. And how do you learn anything in first period? You know, you're not even awake yet. And so maybe that was the thing. So I got up to Portland in 1975. Graduated from high school in 73, and I got up to Portland. I slid my way into this Latin band, and I was impressed with them at first because they just had their own mic stands and stuff. I thought that was like really cool, and what I actually knew about music at that time would have fit on the head of a pin. But the band had horns, and I just got hooked on that right away. And I decided at age like 21 that I wanted to be an arranger. And so I started arranging for them. And then that band kind of split up in 78. And 79, we started Nu Shooz, me and the lead singer in the Latin band, which was called Felicidades, which means happiness. So we started this band in 79. And at first it was 4-piece. And everybody was bringing in material, and it had no continuity. It was just a mess. But the drummer got me into this rehearsal big band called Walter Bridges Big Band. He was the first black member of the Portland Musicians Union, or so he claimed. He was a real character. But anyway, I snagged my first horn section from there, and I went around, I picked out 4 guys, and I said, "You want to play some Tower of Power and Earth, Wind, and Fire?" And I started writing all this stuff out, and it just sounded fantastic right away. I was fortunate because everything I wrote up got played. So I got to hear the stuff that didn't work and the stuff that did work. And so in 1980, the horn band just took off. We had 12 people at first, and then we slimmed it down to 9. And that was the band that got us into this club called the Last Hurrah, and it was one of the top clubs, and we were like instantly one of the top 5 bands in Portland. So that was like 1980, and that band lasted until 82. So this isn't even like, we got on the radio in 85, so that was a completely different band after the first one fell apart. And the lead singer got kidnapped by cocaine, and by the time he missed his 3rd gig, everybody was going, "Well, if you don't fire him, there's no rules." And so that's when Valerie became the lead singer.
Mm-hmm. What was her
83.
role before that?
She was a backup singer, and Valerie was an excellent Latin percussionist. When I was in Felicidades, she was playing with a Ghanaian master drummer named Oboadi. So she was playing an African band, and I was trying to turn Felicidades from a calypso band to a salsa band. And so she was just she had manual dexterity. And so, like, she became a competent percussionist in about 2 weeks. And then she studied with some master drummers and stuff. She was a person who could take lessons, I just read books. So anyway, that's how the band kind of was formed and its early trajectory. And so then in 1985, the program director for Z100, the top 40 station in Portland, decided he wanted to break another band out of Portland. Quarter Flash had that hit Hard in My Heart in 82, but we got on the radio in Portland in April 85, and we became regional hit. Like they put that on and the phones just lit up, It was like an instant smash. And that was the American version. That's before they put that noise on the front of it, that we all know and love. That was put on there by a remix guy in Holland. And so what got on the radio first was what we call the American version. And then he put that thing on it, which we lovingly call the barking seal. And,
right.
Yeah. And so every label turned us down. Warner Brothers gave us a demo deal because we knew a guy that worked there. But it turned out they were just kind of doing that to go, okay, you kids.
Right.
Thank you very much. So they didn't sign us. But then the remix version came into New York as an import, and it just was roaring off the shelves, like 10,000 copies a week in the club scene, It became a club smash at the New York clubs, the Paradise Garage and the Palladium and the Roseland. And that's when a kid at Atlantic discovered us and said to the dance department, well, you should sign these guys. And so they signed us to a singles deal, and then 4 months later they wanted an album, and that was the Poolside record. So that's the story up to the point where we got signed. And then we eventually, I Can't Wait, made it to number 3, which is amazing because there's Beatles songs that didn't make it to number 3. There's Rolling Stones songs that didn't make it to number 3. So that's pretty high achievement, But I think that ultimately, I Can't Wait was such a huge hit that it kind of ate the band. It's the song that ate the band. And you think about huge songs like My Sharona or Take On Me by A-ha. That's a good example because it had an instrumental hook that really made the song go. But both those bands, you never heard anything else from them again. We charted 3 or 4 times, but it's like people didn't want to hear anything else. We made 7 records, and I still call them records. But yeah, we made 7 albums, and that's what everybody wanted to hear. And we're still talking about I Can't Wait 40 years later.
Right.
Which is,
Well, just talk about the gift and the curse of having a timeless classic hit like that, where you can live off of it the rest of your life, but because, like you mentioned in the beginning, your creative philosophy is surfing.
Yeah.
It sort of prevents that from happening.
Well, I never had writer's block. Never. I could just keep making stuff. I was very prolific, but lazy too. I didn't really, if I wrote something, I tried to write 2 songs a week for rehearsal. And once it was up and running, it was, well, that's good enough. Blessing and curse. Well, here's the curse part. When we got on the radio in Portland, we were like the Trailblazers winning the one time they won the championship, And so people flocked to our gigs. They stayed there for 4 hours. They danced to everything. There was this kind of shoes mania in Portland. And then we went on tour. And we played 70 cities in 73 days, which is like 2.5, 3 months, And on our 3 days off, you know what we did? Laundry. No, we did laundry.
That's smart.
We never did. I was lucky because I was on the road with my wife, but other band members, their marriages fell apart and stuff. But yeah, so we go on the road. There were a few triumphant shows, but for the most part, a lot of people just sat on their hands and waited for the hit, you know? And I found that kind of, honestly, I thought it was boring. And it was boring for me to play the same 9 songs over and over. I want to make up stuff. I just heard that, who was it? Ben Folds. You know who that is? Heard of Ben Folds? He's a kind of piano player, indie pop guy. But he had a thing in his show where he'd make up a song from scratch every night.
Wow.
And if I could have done that, that would have made touring more fun. Because I just wanted the new thing, you know. You ask a songwriter what's their favorite song, and they say the next one. And I'm kind of like that.
Yeah.
You know, I just like making stuff. And that's back to the art as surfing. You know, I just want to go surf.
Yeah,
and I've never surfed, by the way.
Nah, me neither. It kind of reminds me of like Lauryn Hill. So the first time I saw her in concert, she didn't do any of the songs from Miseducation of Lauryn Hill the way it sounded on the album. And it had a mixed reaction from the concert goers.
Sure.
But like you were saying, like you get bored doing the same songs over and over again the same way. So like as a musician, you want to be able to color outside of the lines and you know put a little another twist on it and you know give it new life.
Yeah, like Bob Dylan, he never plays his songs like, you know, if he has a song in 4/4, he might do it in 3/4. He might do it as a country song. You know, but he's Bob Dylan. You know, he's like one of those Mount Rushmore kind of artists, like Stevie Wonder, you know. And I get it now that I'm more mature, that I just didn't freaking understand show business. We were jazz people, Latin jazz musicians, you know. We didn't listen to Top 40, and we didn't know how the business worked or what the expectations of real show business, I call it real show business, the expectations are of the artist, you know. I just didn't know until later, until after we got dropped from Atlantic. Then I started learning. I learned a lot more about songwriting and music and everything after we got dropped, and I was happy to get dropped by that point.
Right.
You know.
So like, I mean, obviously we'll talk about I Can't Wait some more, and I want to get in the point of no return, but just talk about the group's philosophy going into Poolside versus Told You So.
That's a great question. And, well, of course, you know, every band that gets signed, you just go in for your first record and you play the stuff you've been playing. So, and here's where I know that you're a big fan of Jeff Lorber. So we did the first album, we did Poolside with Jeff Lorber. I Can't Wait was already recorded, and so was Point of No Return, I think. It was a long time ago. But, you know, and being in the studio with Lorber was amazing because he was one of the top session keyboardists in Los Angeles. What they call a triple scale session musician, you know, triple scale. He had guys that would come in, Cartage Company would come in and set up this mountain of gear, you know. And we did a lot of it at his house, too. He had a home studio that was, for that time, amazing. And I had never seen that kind of technology before. I mean, we didn't have a drum machine. We Nu Shooz in the early 80s, we couldn't afford a keyboard. But finally, one of our horn players bought a keyboard, which we used. And it was a Roland XP80. And it had, I think it had 8 patches. It had 8 buttons. It had 8 sounds, right? And we used every one of them on I Can't Wait. So the second record had the delusion that I could be an artist now, you know, and I was really into this band called Little Feat. Maybe you never heard of them. Sort of bluesy Warner Brothers act. Mm-hmm. I really liked the singer, and he played slide guitar, which I do too. And so, I don't know. But anyway, signed on with this producer named David Z. Rivkin, who was one of the Prince crowd, so one of his engineers, actually. And so I spent 3 months almost by myself in Minnesota, in Minneapolis, with the Prince people. We actually got to record at Paisley Park, too, when it was brand spanking new. It's all so clean. And we had the whole place to ourselves. And like I roamed around Paisley Park. I tried on Prince's clothes. I sat in the hallway and played one of his guitars, you know. So that was a treat. And Rivkin was a great producer. I learned a lot of tricks from him, but it wasn't a good match. So we ended up after 3 months taking the record and finishing it with Lorber again. And the Should I Say Yes was recorded in Minnesota, and they had exiled me to this place called the Dungeon. It was this big stone 19th century building. I'm in the basement, and there's just all this old kind of stone all around, and I wrote Should I Say Yes down there. But yeah, and that was the hit on there. And we like to say that we had 2.5 hits because I Can't Wait and Point of No Return went top 40, and Should I Say Yes got to 41. So we missed out on all that free American Top 40, Casey Kasem, all that stuff that would have pushed it higher. So that's why we say we had 2.5 hits. But that was a good record. And then the third record that we made, we spent too long on it. It was called Eat and Run, which was kind of a in-joke of the band, because we figured that our days at Atlantic were numbered, and so we're going to eat as much Chinese food as we could on the record budget. And then Atlantic didn't release that record, and later on we figured, well, they rejected all those songs, let's take them back. So in 2016 we remixed that and put it out as Kung Pao Kitchen. Yeah. Anyway, so that's our sordid history on Atlantic Records.
Right.
See, if you're on a label, we were on that label for 7 years. By the time 7 years goes by, the people that signed you are gone because they're trying to look for a higher paying job. You know, they do their work in the morning, have lunch, and then they're on the phone looking for a higher paying job. That's record company.
Yeah, I've heard that story told with plenty of artists where the people that sign you leave or are fired, and then a new regime comes in and they either already have their favorites or there's whoever they sign they're prioritizing, and then some of the acts that have been there carrying the label is no longer a priority and gets kind of put on the shelf.
Yeah, well, the new head of the R&B department at that time had a different vision, and she really didn't know what to do with a white hippie funk band. You know, she was going for the more adult R&B sound like Levert and the kind of R&B for the BMW, you know. And so I understood that we didn't fit in, and by that time I was a little weary of making Nu Shooz records.
What would you define the group as, I guess, at that point? Because R&B, I don't think people would have said Nu Shooz is an R&B group, and it's not new wave. So like how
No.
How would you define
new wave?
How would you define the group?
Well, you know, I think that our Latin jazz roots showed the whole time. You know, I was into Eddie Palmieri and stuff. He was one of my arranging inspirations. And I think we were jazz hippies. That's what we were. We really came. Valerie and I met in a hippie commune, you know, and so I don't know. We thought we were doing R&B, but I feel like we weren't part of the herky-jerky 80s, you know? We weren't, I don't want you coming home, wasting all my time. You know, we weren't that, right? We were, and I grew up listening to R&B, but old R&B, you know? Like in the 60s, I collected 45s. I had every James Brown 45, and I don't know why it took me so damn long to start a band or learn to play an instrument, you know? But I didn't do that until 1971 when I was like 16. But from the age of 11 on, I was listening to R&B. Like, I loved Smokey Robinson and the Miracles back then, and James Brown, of course, and the Temptations, especially the psychedelic Norman Whitfield Temptations.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know. We thought we were an R&B band, and definitely not new wave. And definitely, I said this with pride back then, we were the anti-punk band. I really disliked punk music. I like it a little more now because it's nostalgic. But back then I was just like, anything. Okay, the punk people hate disco. We're going to play disco.
Mm-hmm.
Let's groove tonight. You know?
Yeah. I have one of the Earth, Wind & Fire records behind me.
I see that. I have that record.
Have you seen the documentary yet?
I don't think so.
It's on HBO.
Okay.
Yeah, I still need to sit down and watch it, but I've been hearing that the late great Maurice White, he has a hell of a story, I'll say.
I read his book, and the thing that I found in common with him is that he always reached for the higher ground, morally, and
Hmm.
and Nu Shooz did that too. We were like, we're a family band. We're not gonna talk about the sordid side of life, or use swear words or anything. We wanted to be wholesome but funky.
As a songwriter, how did your creations originate? Was it usually, from the melody, the groove, the lyric? Like, what was the starting point more times than not?
Well, the first thing that I thought of doing was just to have a batch of lyric things that I was working on and a batch of chord changes that I was working on. Kept them separate until it's like, well, this lyric might fit over that, and that groove might fit over these words and stuff. So that's how I functioned. I called it the bone pile. And so I had two bone piles going, one of lyrics and one of piano chords, basically.
Okay.
And then I would assemble them. I had so many, I was just making this stuff up all the time. And usually it was after the gig. Like we would play till 1 o'clock, and I'd get mine and Val's gear loaded into the car. Like in 15 minutes, I'd be out of the club. And I'd go home and I'd set up right away and start writing stuff. And I guess I had a drum machine by that time. But yeah, so I would work till like 3 in the morning, and most of my songwriting happened between like 1:30 and 3. And you got to remember that back in those days, the TV signed off at 1:30. So I would get the gear in the car and rush home so I could watch the last TV show, which was either The Little Rascals or The Three Stooges. And then when the TV signed off, I'd go downstairs and write songs and try to finish 2 for every rehearsal, because I just was bored. Also, it was hard to find cover tunes up in Portland because there was no R&B radio up there. So my mom still lived in Los Angeles, and I would go down there to visit her and tape the radio just to find cover tunes.
Yeah.
Dr. Todd McLean provides periodontal and dental implant services in 2 convenient locations. They offer over a decade of experience treating patients, and appointments can even be scheduled in the evenings, weekends, or early mornings. Give them a call in Chapel Hill at 919-537-9774 or in Durham at 919-484-8338, or visit them online at gumsandimplants.org.
I was going to ask you in the beginning of the interview about Portland's music scene. And I know that obviously Marlon McLean and Pleasure, is out of the Rose City. Was there a lot of opportunity there? And how does Portland's music scene compare to Seattle's?
Oh, well, Seattle got all the press in the 90s with the grunge thing. And we never really cracked Seattle. There was sort of a Seattle-Portland rivalry. And back to Pleasure, I never heard a Pleasure record until like 3-4 years ago. I knew of them. I knew Bruce Carter a little bit, and but there was no R&B radio, and to be perfectly honest, Portland was a segregated city. But I believe that Portland had at that time between like 1980 and 1986 had the best music scene in the world, and it doesn't get the press that Seattle got. But there were 10 clubs in a square mile radius of downtown. We worked every weekend for years. Once, like from 81, when we got into the clubs, like we just played all the time. One year we played 300 days, so by the time we got signed, we could really play. And yeah, Portland was just like a gem.
Mm-hmm.
And then the liquor laws changed about 87, and the insurance for clubs went up, so a lot of clubs closed. But there was plenty of work for years.
Yeah. All right. So like after things no longer worked out with Atlantic Records, what happened? Because I know there was a huge gap between your last record with them and then coming back years later with Kung Pao Kitchen.
Yeah. Well, I got really lucky because our manager, Rick Warritz, he co-produced all the Atlantic records with me and the 2 local records before that. We produced those together. And he was more interested in the engineering part. I couldn't stand listening to them tweak the snare drum for an hour. But he became an engineer, and he got hired at an ad music house called Scream Music. And he brought me in as the music arranger. And so all of a sudden I'm doing Nike and Intel and Freightliner and Taco Bell and all this stuff. And it was what we call the go-go 90s, where everybody was working 70 hours a week. And we were working 70 hours a week. We were, I was sharing a studio, so I worked mostly at night. And that lasted for 16 years. And then, I forget the timeline of this, but then we got asked to, people kept asking us to go on these track date oldies tours where there'd be like 10 bands, like it was like Lisa and Expose and those radio kind of bands playing over tracks in an arena with 10 or 15,000 people. So finally we said, yeah, okay, we'll do it. They said, come on, it'll be fun, We ended up doing that for 7 years. We played 100 shows, which is over 7 years. Which 100 shows, that's 200 plane rides. Think about that. At one point, man, my knees, like your knees go out if you sit on a plane too much. I could barely pull my suitcase down the runway, But that was fun.
John?
Pardon?
How tall are you? Because you look like you're
No,
tall.
I'm not.
Okay.
I'm 5'7".
Okay. Yeah, because I was going to say, obviously with that length.
Tall people, their knees go out anyway.
Well, yeah.
Yeah, that cartilage, they can't handle that, That's why the life of a NBA player is so short. But yeah, so 16 years of advertising, and then 7 years, well, about 2-3 years into the oldies shows, there were 2 tours that we were on. One was Super Freestyle Explosion, and the other one was Lost 80s, which was more of the white acts, like whatchamacallit, Modern English and all those guys.
That's like Boy George and...
We did one show with Boy George, and it turned out to be a super nice guy. But what am I thinking of? Oh, Flock of Seagulls.
Okay, yeah.
Those kind of bands, That was Lost 80s, and then Freestyle Explosion was more of the funky acts. Yeah. Did
you feel like you blended well with those lineups, especially the freestyle lineup?
No, because Nu Shooz was just an amazing crossover. Everybody liked that, And so 2-3 years into those tours, we decided that we needed to do something besides just me and Val playing over tracks. And so we put the band back together with all people who had been in the band over the years. And we put a new band together and played around a little bit.
And that was Nu Shooz Orchestra?
But the audience had changed by that point. And our audience was the same age as us. And when you're in your 20s, Valerie came up with this theory. When you're in your 20s, you go to clubs because it's a mating ritual. You're trying to find people to mate with. Right? And so you'll listen to anything, and you'll come hear the same band every night and listen to the same songs, because that's not what you're there for. But now our audience is the same age as us. They're in their 50s and 60s, and they just want reassurance. They just want the familiar stuff, right? And so it was a great band, but it was less interesting to play. But because it was a great band and we had a really good home studio at that point, we decided to make one last record, and that was Bagtown in 2016. And we knew it was going to be our last record. And so that just made it more fun. It was kind of joyous, and it was really easy. I wrote the whole thing in 6 weeks, and we recorded it in another 6 weeks, and it was super fun. And it was the cream of the crop of people who had played with us. So that was a lot of fun. And, it did nothing, but I wrote a couple of songs I really like on that. So back to Point of No Return. I just want to make a point about that.
Go ahead.
I listened to this Chrissie Hynde interview, and she said that there was one of her hits that she really didn't like. Which one? It's Brass in Pocket. Dun, 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 dun. You know that one?
Mm-hmm.
Gonna make you. And the interviewer asked her why, and she said because it didn't come out like what I was going for. She was kind of wanted it to be more Motown, I think. And I feel the same way about Point of No Return. It's a hit. People like it. People like the video. I don't love the video, but it just didn't come out like what I was going for. And I never felt like it was really completed either. It was just like, okay, we started playing it, and then it was kind of, we just ended up doing it how we played it instead of what the conception of a record of it would be, if you know what I mean. Anyway, enough of that. What do you got?
Nah, to me that's interesting. The fact that, I mean, because you sound like you're a perfectionist, and yeah, a lot of times, like in hindsight, you go back and listen to something and be like, wow, I wish I had done this instead with it, or it's missing something from a lyrical standpoint. So
why did I
mean,
write
do you
that
come
line?
across that?
Why did I
Yeah,
say
do you come across
stupid?
that with all of the songs?
Listen, I'm still fixing songs from 1980, like, and a couple of them I made better. You know, just driving around in my car, I'm still haunted by some of these things. And one thing they said about the Beatles was they got all their bad songs out of the way when they were teenagers. Well, I got a lot of my bad songs out of the way in that first 4-piece incarnation of Nu Shooz. And so, I mean, there's songs that I remember, and I'm just like, that's so awful. But I really wasn't a songwriter. I didn't come at it from songwriting because, I mean, it took me years to realize what a great songwriter Hendrix was, because I was just listening to the textures of the records, you know. And Coltrane and Charlie Parker, they're instrumentalists. You know, I listen to those guys. Listen to Mahavishnu Orchestra. And so I didn't come at it like from a singer-songwriter place. So I had to work that out, you know. I had to make all my mistakes. And so, yeah, I'm still to this day fixing some of those songs in my head. And wow, that could have been good if I had just done that instead. Why didn't I think of that? You know, I was just doing that today, walking around going, I could have put that line in. And I have this other songwriting trick I should mention for anyone that's really interested in songwriting, is something that I discovered later on, because I did try to write a few songs later on. Well, yeah, Bagtown, for instance. On Bagtown, when I had a working hook for the song, but I knew in my heart that it could be better. You know, I have this thing, it fits. It could be better. Well, my new trick that I came up with on Bagtown was, okay, well, that's okay. Let's make that the B section and try to top it with a new section. And that worked really good because it was good enough to be a B section, but it wasn't good enough to carry the whole tune, right? So that's something I discovered on our final record, actually.
So, like, the band retired in 2019.
Yeah.
Performing as well. Like,
right before COVID.
Yeah, perfect timing, because I know it was tough for musicians and, well, pretty much everybody, but the decision to retire and say, like, Valerie's moving on into, you know, teaching, and you're scoring films and commercials and all of that, like, was that a easy conversation, or did you just know that it was time?
You know, Valerie and I always came to these things at the same moment. And first of all, we couldn't get any traction with the live band, so we shut that down in 2017 and did the oldies tour for 2 more years till 2019. And I turned to Val and I said, you want to not do this anymore? And she was like, yeah, I'm thinking the same thing. You know, we were just done with it. It's been 40 years. So that's enough, you know, enough time on that. And we're really grateful because however artistically it fell short, we got to do so much amazing stuff. I got to do a project with Ahmet Erdogan at Atlantic. You know, we did a California Raisins record with Ahmet Erdogan, you know, and just all the people we met, you know. I got to hang out with Jimmy Jam a couple times, and he said him and Terry wished they'd written I Can't Wait. So, you know, we had a lot of groovy things happen. And we got to be artists for the rest of our lives. So what's not to like, right? The last jobby job I had, not counting the ad work, which was pleasure and pain and heaven and hell all at the same time, but, you know, there was a heaven part. You know, we just got to do a lot of things. But the last kind of job I had was working in a parking lot in 1979. When I was 23. So I got nothing to complain about.
Nah, life is good. Like, Did you envision your journey playing out like this?
No, how could you? You know, but like I say, things just fell into place, right? I took a guitar lesson from this guy that played in a TV show orchestra, and he showed me some things to do with chords. And then somebody gives me a Downbeat magazine with a Tower of Power chart in it. And I looked at the chart, I read the chart, and I'm like, these are the same things that they're writing for the horns. See, this same things this guitar teacher told me to play on the guitar. I could do this, you know? And so it was like chunk, 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 chunk. You know, the right people show up. Our first drummer gave me a couple cassettes. One was Tower of Power. One was Johnny Guitar Watson, you know? And so I'm off and running. And it just like, it was really pleasurable work, you know?
Yeah.
And it just happened like a miracle. It's like all the strawberries coming up on the slot machine. But I never could have pictured it, you know? I couldn't have made that up. You couldn't make that up. When I started a band, I just wanted a band with the t-shirt and mic stands.
You didn't think you would see the world?
No, but we sure did.
Talk about like how you're received in Europe versus here in the States.
Well, we didn't get to play Europe a lot, and it makes me kind of cringe because we were on Top of the Pops, which is the big show. It's kind of the American Bandstand of England. And it was just Val and I up there doing these dance steps. I hated doing dance steps. But God, if I had known that it had an audience of 40 million people, I would have insisted on taking a band or hiring English musicians to play on TV, because we were a mighty band. And then we got marketed as a husband and wife duo from Portland, Oregon, you know, and I just thought it was boring, you know, because we were actually something like Tower of Power. We were a Tower of Power, you know. And so, I don't know, Europe, it's just like here, you know, that the singles, that's what we're perceived at. And actually, I know Valerie, if she were here, she would say that the songs were more famous than we were, which ended up being good for two reasons. I mean, like, then you could walk down the street, you know, you could go to the grocery store and stuff like that. You know, nobody really knew who we were. And the other half of it is I truly believe that I got the amount of fame that I was mature enough to handle. And you think about that poor guy in INXS.
Yeah, Michael Hutchence.
Yeah, Michael Hutchence, yeah. And he was on every magazine cover in the world, right? And he was like sort of a obviously more glamorous person than I am, but he couldn't handle it. He OD'd. I didn't have to do that, you know? So I feel content with the amount of fame that was given to us, and the fact that I Can't Wait especially is an anthem of the 80s. I think people use the word iconic too much, but let's say emblematic of the 80s. You know, it's going to be when, you know, you think about the 40s, and what do you think of? Well, we're going to be on that for the 80s. We're going to come up, right? We will, because it's that sought after. I mean, we were getting 800,000 or 1 million Spotifys a month. Still, that's enough fame for me.
Yeah. And I mean, when you hear the song, like it's a timestamp. It takes you to, like you said, 86, 87. I was in elementary school, and a lot of the music from that time when I was like in kindergarten or first grade, like it sticks with me, like A Pleasure Principle and
it's forever.
Like,
yeah.
Tell It to My Heart, Taylor Dane, and all of that. Like those songs just stick with you, and it brings back good times, good memories. So like for you to have one of those, and not have to deal with the fame aspect of it. I mean, to me, that's chef's kiss.
Yeah. You know, there's people that do that a lot better than we would, you know, do the fame thing. And there's people who want it more, you know. We were just like all about the music, really. And we had to learn the other things, like how to dress and I don't know, radio interviews that came naturally, TV interviews and stuff. But yeah, we got to do a lot of neat things. We got to meet Dick Clark, you know, and Dionne Warwick and Marilyn McCoo. That's enough fame for me.
Yeah. And I get to meet people like you, so this is enough fame for me. And just hearing the stories, I read recently that you and Valerie sold your catalog.
You did, huh?
I did. So like, I'm sure, was it Seeker Music Group? I'm sure they wasn't the first ones to approach you. So what made the time right for this acquisition?
I wasn't really terribly involved in the transaction, but our financial advisor told us that we could get a chunk of money and make it work for us instead of having it come in. We were doing fine, but if you have a bigger chunk of money, you can let it grow for you. So that was the decision. And frankly, that we're retiring the group, so it made sense. It made sense on a bunch of levels, and we could set up our son better and do some things for him. So that's the short version.
Yeah.
I don't know. We're trying not to talk about it a lot.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Like I said, that was just something I saw happen, I guess, a few months ago, and
Well, I guess it's out in the world.
yeah, it's out there. It's discoverable.
So you read the trade publications, right?
Sometimes.
I mean, where'd you find out about that?
It was just a simple Google. I was like Google, recent Nu Shooz news, and it came up.
Okay.
Back in April, I think it was.
Okay.
The
Well, I gotta
transaction took
compliment
place.
you. I gotta compliment you on your research. You do a really good job.
Appreciate it. I mean, I'm a fan, so it's no big deal. There's a whole lot more we could get into, but obviously for the sake of time, we won't. But yeah, tell me about Optical Pictures.
Oh yeah, well that's my surfing site. I really love old movies and especially B movies. That were just like, I'm not gonna marry you.
Uh-huh.
And you get out of town. You got till high noon to get out of town. That kind of like straightforward kind of storytelling. And my son's a comic book artist, so since he was a wee lad, he's a really talented artist, and so kind of said, well, Dad, why don't you make one? Because I'm an artist too. And so I think I started this run of graphic novels in 2016, and I just started making them, and they're not really literary, so I kind of don't want my literary friends to read them because they just think it was stupid. But yeah, I have a really good time with this, and I've got a recurring character, this guy Mike Strobe, who's a 30s filmmaker who specializes in jungle movies. Like like Tarzan and stuff.
Uh-huh.
So that's what optical pictures are, and it's sort of a dumb joke. Optical pictures you can see. You know what I mean? Like audible records.
Yeah. So you're pretty much saying you and your son collaborate on these projects?
Well, the way he puts it, it's really neat. It's like we have 2 studios and share a parking lot, and so it's like, hey Mel, come over here. Should I do this line or that line? Which do you like better? And then he's a really great collaborator because he lets me mess with his words. So I do a lot of rewriting of his dialogue and stuff and make it short and snappy. So I can bump up the words in his comics, and the art he's a great artist. He's way better than me, but I'm not bad.
So we can say that this is the new version of Nu Shooz, you and your
Sure.
son.
He's got a band too. He just put a band together with a guy that he worked at a restaurant with. They got a terrible band name though, Drain Pipes.
Wow.
Like, dude, keep working on that band.
Yeah, I was gonna say it sounds like that's not gonna stick.
Yeah, I hope not.
I heard that it took decades for you to like Nu Shooz,
Yeah,
the name.
for sure.
What took so long?
I just wanted something edgier, like Megadeth, although that wouldn't have been appropriate. And 30 years went by and I realized that Nu Shooz was like so perfect for a dance club, a band that made dance club records, So I came around to it. But yeah, we got it off of some wallpaper. Like there were these shoes on the wall, like a 1890s newspaper ad page. And there were these button-up, high-button shoes, they used to call them. And my co-founder, Larry Hagan, and I looked at each other and went, shoes. That's a dumb noun, cause it was the era of dumb nouns. It was like the Cars, the Police, you know. So shoes. Okay, so we'll be the Shoes. Then we went into a record store and saw an album by this band called Shoes. They're from Ohio, I think. And I thought that not being the Shoes was kind of pretentious. And then our bass player said, you could be Nu Shooz and spell it like this, because it's more rock. Spell it with the OOZ, you know. Spell it wrong because it's more rock spelling. And so that's what we were. Because we had, started rehearsing in May 79. And we had a gig in the middle of June. So we had a month to throw something together, and we needed a band name to put on the poster.
Has there ever been a moment on stage where fans threw their shoes on the stage or gave you their shoes?
No, thank goodness. And that's one of the reasons that I'm bugged by the Point of No Return video, which was all shoes, because we had never used shoes in any advertising, or, you know, that just seemed kind of too obvious. And then the guys came along to make the second video, and they go, we got this great idea. We're going to have shoes, and we're going to animate them. And we're like,
that's total 80s corniness.
Yeah, but we had never used them, you know. But once we got signed, we just wanted to get along with everybody. So we said yes to everything, and some things that we should not have. But anyway, it all turned out great, you know. And people still they're still interested. I think that Seeker's going to re-release Poolside near the end of the year, and we'll see how well that does.
All right. What do you feel is your magnum opus? And that, it doesn't have to be the obvious, I can't wait. It could be like from your film scoring days or, you know, comic books, whatever. What do you feel is your best creation?
Well, that's such a nice question. I really do like the graphic novels. I go back and forth between this totally sucks and, wow, this is a great piece of work. You know, like all artists do. And there's, we made this album called Pandora's Box, which was not a Nu Shooz sounding record, and it baffled a lot of our fans. But I think that Valerie and I are both really proud of it. A lot of great songs on it, she called it jazz pop cinema. It was like very film scory, but a record, songs, you know. So I like that, and I love this song on Bagtown called Tell Me a Lie. You know, somebody asked me, what's your favorite song? They were expecting me to say I Can't Wait, I think, and I just said, you know, something you never heard.
Yeah,
so,
I would never expect an artist to say that their favorite song is the most popular song, because a lot of times those songs are made against their will in some cases. So,
yeah, I don't know about that. A lot of people, I wrote I Can't Wait, but half a dozen other people contributed to it. And like maybe 8 different people worked on that and added something to it that made it what it is, you know. And I learned so much about songwriting after we weren't on a record label anymore. So I've written a lot of things where I go, wow, yeah, you didn't know that 10 years ago, how to do that.
Yeah.
Yeah. What makes a song? Well, different rhyme schemes. Like in the 80s, there was a lot of rhymed couplets. It would be like fire, desire, away, stay, and then a hook, you know. And I learned a lot of different ways to make verses and stuff. So if there was a reason to do it now, I would be able to write better than I did when I was 25.
Yeah. Is there a present day musician that you would love to collaborate it with?
Oh my God. Well, you know, I'm playing every Wednesday night at the Bellingham Yacht Club with this band called the Navigators.
Mm-hmm.
And I was brought in as a guest, and I ended up staying. And none of my jazz stuff fits with what they play. So I had to learn how to play country. And country turns out is just as interesting as like bebop jazz. It's just as complex as that. So I'm playing lap steel and steel guitar and guitar. And so I'm listening to a lot of country guys. And I'm just blown away by this guy, Brad Paisley. Amazing. One of the most amazing guitars on the planet right now. So I don't know, who would I want to collaborate with? In R&B, who would I want to collaborate with? I don't know, man. You know, I I've kind of drifted so far away from that kind of music and songwriting in general that I don't know. I find enough stuff to fill my days. Let's just say that.
Oh, that's good. That's good.
You know, I have a good life.
Yeah.
And Val and I are good, you know. We're in a very sweet season of our lives. I'm 70 now.
Yeah. And I know Valerie she's been doing podcasts.
Yeah. She taught, well, I was doing advertising music. She was teaching 30 students a week, vocal students. And so she stopped doing that right around when I stopped doing the ad work. And now she's doing a course that she's been working on for 8 years, a course for singers, which is about everything but how to sing. It's called Living a Vocal Life. And it's just about like how to communicate with the band, how to get your book of charts together, how to choose clothing and attitude and all the things, everything but singing, the singing part, you know, how to have a band basically. And she claims she's almost done with it.
Well, John, before we wrap, feel free to plug where we can find you and all of your work, find the band. I know you got NuShoozMusic.com where we can discover everything that Valerie's up to, the whole nine.
Yeah, we're going to keep the website going too. So NuShoozMusic.com, all one word, I think. And then there's links to optical pictures, and there's links to Valerie's stuff. It's easy. Yeah. Hey, well, it's been a blast.
Yes, it has been. John Smith of Nu Shooz. You know, it's always great to catch up with the legends, to take a trip down memory lane. And, you know, like I said, I Can't Wait as a timestamp. And
you bet.
And, you know, we're going to forever have that song embedded in our heart. So thank you again for your contributions.
Yeah, they came right out of our basement.
And for Stop, Look, and Listen, I'm LeTroy Gardner. See you next week. Peace
Hang
and
in there,
blessings.
man.